Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 15th. Do you have your taxes in? You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And we try to remind you to file your taxes so the IRS tax man doesn't come after you.
Or woman.
Or woman. No, I was referring to the Beatles song, the tax man. But yes, tax man or woman. Actually, there was a interview that went viral yesterday. We were talking about the space launch, and we'll get into it later in this podcast again. And the CBS morning show was talking to an expert about, the history making here. And the anchor, actually friend of the pod, Vlad Dutier, was referring to mankind. And the guest kept being like, no, we should discuss humankind. It's humankind, not mankind.
The funny thing is, I really am not like that. Like, I seldom would be like, it's womankind or,
Mosh.
Tax women.
Moosh, there's tax women who can audit you and put you in jail as well.
But a very cool history-making trip that we will get to.
For humankind, Jill.
For humankind, yes. All right, so let's get to the headlines here. The latest on the man accidentally deported to El Salvador. That country's president at the White House Monday, what he said about plans to return that man to the United States.
And what Trump says he's looking into as far as sending American criminals to El Salvador.
We're also learning more about the arsonist who set fire to the Pennsylvania governor's mansion and what he said he planned to do if he had actually seen Governor Josh Shapiro. Scary stuff. Then Harvard standing up to the Trump administration despite threats to pull federal funding. In some tech news, Nvidia's announced it's taking steps to mass produce AI supercomputers entirely in the United States for the first time. And months after the assassination of UnitedHealthcare's CEO, an intruder was arrested near the company's headquarters in Minnesota. Back in Washington, Meta is on trial, a case that could show the government's ability to take on big tech monopolies.
Why the government has their work cut out for them in this case.
And finally, the all-female crew that launched into space yesterday, they made it home safely with some heartfelt moments from the launch.
And some humor, what Lauren Sanchez is saying about her fiance, Jeff Bezos, and why she may have been worried she was being sent into space.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
A big day for American fast food history today, Jill.
All right, El Salvador's leader, Nayib Bukele, visited President Trump at the White House yesterday, adding another wrinkle to the controversial case of a Salvadoran man accidentally deported back to his home country by U.S. authorities. Bukele said Monday he has no plans to return that man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Notably, the Trump administration is deferring to El Salvador and Bukele about the case, despite officials admitting that they shouldn't have deported him to El Salvador in the first place. As we told you yesterday, the Supreme Court here in the U.S. has also ruled that the White House must, quote, facilitate the man's release. More on that word in a moment. Some background here. Abrego Garcia was taken into custody in March of this year when he and more than 200 migrants also accused of being gang members were sent to a notorious mega prison in El Salvador. The Trump administration admitted that he should not have been part of that group because he was previously granted protected legal status to stay in the United States because of the violent threats that he had faced back home. They called the mistake a clerical error, but said now that he is in El Salvador, they don't have the jurisdiction to bring him back. That's actually up to El Salvador's president. Well, on Monday, Bukele was asked if he has any plans to send Abrego Garcia back to the U.S., where he is married to a U.S. citizen. He has a 5-year-old child. Take a listen to Bukele's response and some of that exchange in the Oval Office.
Suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Abrego Garcia, by the way, has never been convicted of terrorism. He first came to the U.S. illegally sometime in 2011 at the age of 16 after fleeing gang threats in El Salvador. In 2019, an immigration judge deferred to the U.S. government when they said that he was part of the MS-13 gang. They rejected his asylum request. The judge granted him protected legal status to stay and work in the U.S., which he did full-time as a union sheet metal apprentice. He was also protected from ever being deported back to El Salvador, but he could be deported to another third-party country. Since then, Abrego Garcia has not faced any other legal issues. This is according to his lawyers. Again, this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court last week, where the justices ruled 9-0 that the U.S. government has to facilitate his release.
Yes, there is that word again, facilitate. And it appears this will now go back to the Supreme Court again, potentially, to clarify exactly what they mean. This is a fight here between the executive branch and judiciary. The judges at the lower court level say, you got to bring him back. And it went already once through to the Supreme Court. And the lower court had said you need to facilitate and effectuate his release. And the Supreme Court agreed that they need to facilitate his release. They took issue with the word effectuate. So now a lower court judge said, okay, fine, I want you to facilitate and direct his release. The White House saying, well, we're just focused on the word facilitate. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, on camera yesterday in the Oval Office saying, facilitate, as far as we're concerned, means we provide a plane if El Salvador wants to send him back. But we can't order El Salvador to send him back, even though background here, the U.S. is paying El Salvador to take all of these prisoners. And so critics here are saying, that the White House is being a bit cute with language here when it comes to facilitate, that they could certainly request, but the U.S. says we can't request. And by the way, the judicial branch cannot order the executive branch what to do when it comes to foreign policy. And we consider this foreign policy here. It's not clear that all of this was understood by Bukele. He was asked about it in the Oval Office. And he said, I can't return this terrorist. I'm not going to return this terrorist. It was not clear, and they didn't ask specifically in the Oval Office, if the U.S. requests that you send him back, would you send him back, which is the issue here. But the Trump administration digging their heels on this. You also saw in the Oval Office yesterday, Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller saying it is arrogant for the media to suggest that we tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens. And that's what's notable here, is this guy happens to be from El Salvador. But, notably, the judge said back in 2019, he can't go back there because ultimately he faces threats there. Now, the government has said he's in that prison in El Salvador. Again, we shouldn't have done it, but it's done. And ultimately, we're not going to request El Salvador to bring him back. And it does not appear that Bukele is interested in sending him back. Remember, Bukele has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. It's a very low bar for him to hold people in prison there. And so really, this case, Jill, it's been so interesting hearing people's reactions to this, because you have the White House and you have people who agree with Trump here emphasizing the following facts. He came into the U.S. illegally. He was accused of being a gang member. And while he accidentally was sent home, he's out of the country. And by the way, that judge back in 2019 said he can be deported. He just can't be deported to El Salvador. Meanwhile, the other side here says, he has a kid plus 2 stepchildren here in the U.S. He's married to an American. He hasn't committed any crimes while he's been here. Specifically, a judge said that he faces threats in his home country and he legally cannot be deported to El Salvador, which he was. And so they say here, this is not okay. And this is a slippery slope here in terms of not addressing the mistake. If courts allow this mistake, and when we say mistake, we mean a man who was not supposed to be sent to a country was sent back to that country, that this is a problem. And so you're seeing this get adjudicated. There's going to be a big hearing today with a district court judge who says, bring him home. There's going to be an appeal, and then likely ends up back at the Supreme Court again. So we're going to watch as this case unfolds. It has gotten attention on Capitol Hill. Former Mo News interview guest, Congressman Richie Torres, a Democrat from New York, dropped legislation yesterday, what he calls the Rescue Act. Rescue standing for Repatriation of Expelled Sovereign Citizens and Unjustly Exiled Act. Believe me, it spells rescue there, RESCUE. Effectively, if this was passed, it would protect someone who was wrongfully deported. And if a foreign government wasn't complying, the U.S. could take actions to force them to comply. The issue here, El Salvador doesn't want to send him back, and the U.S., the current government, does not want to request him back. It's not clear whether Torres can get Republicans on board here, or Republicans control the Senate and the House. Nonetheless, he dropped it. I messaged with him yesterday, and he says he's hopeful that the legislation can move through here.
So the U.S. is paying El Salvador about $6 million to take in the nearly 300 prisoners that it deported there last month. On Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said 10 more alleged gang members were sent there from the U.S. detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Abrego Garcia is currently being held in that notorious prison where prisoners are not allowed visitations, recreation, education. The lights are apparently kept on 24 hours a day. Bukele boasted in the Oval Office that people say he has imprisoned thousands during his time in office, but he said that he prefers to say that he has, quote, liberated millions of citizens instead. The 43-year-old president has gained widespread popularity in his country for his tough-on-crime approach to gang violence. Last year, 1 in every 57 Salvadorans was incarcerated. That's the highest incarceration rate in the world. And it partly came from Bukele's 2022 state of emergency declaration, which allowed police to arrest any suspected gang members without a warrant. Crime rates in El Salvador dropped to a record low of 114 homicides in 2024, down from nearly 7,000 10 years ago when it was one of the deadliest countries in the world.
Yeah, I get messages from El Salvador from locals there who praise him, saying it's safe to walk the streets again. At the same time, there are those, including human rights groups and others, who say that Bukele has circumvented due process, that he has effectively given up on democracy, that he's effectively made El Salvador an authoritarian regime, sort of like China, Rwanda, and others, where you give up your rights, you give up independent courts, you give up freedom of speech, you give up free press, in exchange for security. Ultimately, that is the bargain there, and that is what he has promised. But ultimately, that has meant that, effectively he gets to do what he wants in that country now. But there's so much history there when it comes to crime that people were effectively willing to give up on a bunch of things in order to say, just make the streets safe again. So he has become buddy-buddy with Trump here in the administration. Remember, one of the first stops Marco Rubio made as Secretary of State was to El Salvador to try to strike this deal, saying, hey, take in some of our illegal migrants. We are running out of prison space here. One item, though, getting attention from that meeting yesterday, before we go here, Trump, as he was entering the Oval Office yesterday, this is before the U.S. media came into the room, was with Bukele. They were chit-chatting. It was actually being live streamed on the El Salvadoran YouTube government channel for Bukele's government. And among the things Trump said was, the next thing for me is homegrowns, implying American citizens need to be sent to the prisons there. Trump joking, and they were laughing, saying, I think I need you to build 5 more mega prisons there in order to be able to hold people that I want to send there. Now, remember, his mega prisons hold 40 or 50,000 people. Now, that is a live stream. We put up that clip on Instagram. Trump then repeated the remark to a certain extent when all the media came in the room. He was continuing to be asked about sending people to El Salvador. Here's a bit of what Trump had to say to all the media assembled.
I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that, Steve, okay?
So I'll add here, Jill, this isn't the first time Trump has implied or said explicitly that he would like to send American criminals, U.S. citizen criminals, to prisons abroad, including El Salvador. And Bukele has said, hey, whoever you send us, we'll totally take, because you pay us about $20,000 a pop. So cool. Send your Americans here, send whatever, as far as I'm concerned. The issue is, well, there's a number of issues here, including the U.S. Constitution, which is even, concerned. These remarks have concerned conservative legal scholars who say that you have a problem, Mr. President, in the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment being the one that says that there should be no cruel and unusual punishment. This goes back literally to the Declaration of Independence. You know who used to send American accused criminals abroad for trial because he thought that would mean conviction? King George and the Brits. So that was one of the issues the American colonists took with the King of England more than 250 years ago. And so it was actually mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. You have it in the Bill of Rights. And so most people believe that this sort of thing would be deemed unconstitutional. Nonetheless, Trump is saying to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, hey, can you look into this whole, can I send American convicted criminals to prisons abroad? This is one of the stories we will keep watching in the coming days. It's getting a lot of attention for good reason.
Okay, next up, an update from Pennsylvania, where we have more information about the 38-year-old man who broke into the governor's residence and set it on fire early Sunday morning. The suspect broke into the residence with a hammer. He told authorities that he would have physically beaten Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro if he had found him. According to law enforcement, the 38-year-old, identified as Cody Balmer, jumped a fence, evaded state troopers, and broke into the home before igniting multiple fires using Molotov cocktails. Shapiro and his family were sleeping inside of the residence at the time. Hours earlier, they had finished celebrating the first night of Passover. Thanks to the quick response by state police, the family was safely evacuated. There were no injuries reported. Authorities announced the arrest of Balmer on Sunday afternoon. He is currently being held on charges including attempted murder, arson, and terrorism. It is unclear if he'll face federal charges. That's up to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Police say Balmer made the explosives using beer bottles and lawnmower gasoline. He walked for about an hour from his home to the governor's mansion. He was inside for less than a minute. After fleeing the scene, he later turned himself into the police in Harrisburg. According to the criminal complaint, Balmer's ex-girlfriend also called state police right after the attack to say that he confessed to setting the fires and wanted her to call the police. Balmer is currently in the hospital for a medical event not related to this incident or his arrest.
Yeah, his mother actually did an interview with CBS News where she said, "My son is mentally ill. He went off his meds, and this is what happens." Court records show he has a long rap sheet here, Jill. Forgery and simple assault down to assault and violent domestic dispute involving his wife and son a couple of years ago. According to the affidavit, Balmer told investigators he had taken a bottle of pills in an attempt to kill himself recently. So just a lot of issues here related to Balmer. And one of the things that struck me about all this, especially as he talked about bringing a hammer in and looking to attack Josh Shapiro, is this feels a lot like that Pelosi situation a couple years ago when an intruder broke into the San Francisco home of then Speaker Nancy Pelosi, struck her husband Paul Pelosi with a hammer. That man was sentenced to both life in state prison and 30 years in federal prison. And he had said, basically his politics had gotten warped in his head and felt that the only way that he could deal with the issues that he felt the country was facing was by committing violence. So, you're hearing similar things from Balmer. I don't know if some of you caught that videotape of him being escorted by the police, but not a well individual here. Trump was asked about it yesterday in the Oval Office. He noted that it appears Balmer was also not a fan of his. He goes, not a fan of Trump. He's probably a whack job. This thing can't happen again. J.D. Vance, the vice president, commented, "Thanks be to God that Governor Shapiro and his family were unharmed in this attack. This is disgusting violence." The photos are astonishing. We posted them early Monday morning. The dining room scorched. You can see that the Jewish prayer texts are scorched that are part of the Passover meal. And the Harrisburg fire chief saying the damage to the residents there will probably be in the millions here. All we've gotten so far from Balmer is that he hated Shapiro. As of late Monday night, they haven't released why he hated him. He clearly had a lot of issues, and whether it was due to his faith, due to his politics, it appears that, he sort of hated a little bit of everybody here. But one of the other questions we'll be asking, and they're asking right now in Pennsylvania, is how did this guy get around security at the Pennsylvania governor mansion? How was he able to get inside, given that there's 24/7 security there? One of the other things we'll be watching develop.
Right, and incredible that he was only in the home for a minute and was able to do so much damage.
Hey, Mo News team, we have launched our annual sale early for all of you, 20% off Mo News Premium. If you're not a member already, this is one of our biggest sales of the year, 20% off Mo News Premium with the code Good News. We're calling it our Good News sale because, as we tell you, sometimes there's not so good news out there, especially in regards to the tariffs and the economy. So we want to do our part here at Mo News by launching our annual sale early by joining Mo News Premium. You support independent media. You support us. We are majority supported by all of you. So appreciate all of you who have joined Mo News Premium. In addition, you get access to our members-only Instagram account, members-only podcast, exclusive analysis on the day-to-day basis. You get to get your questions answered. We have exclusive workshops for all of you, as well as behind-the-scenes content, a weekly news quiz, a whole assortment of things. We also do weekend coverage over there. So if you can't get enough and you want to know what's happening on Saturdays and Sundays, you can head over to Mo News Premium Instagram. So again, you can join us over at mo.news/premium. The code is Good News for 20% off. That includes existing annual members, new annual members, people looking to convert from monthly to annual. Again, the code Good News is part of our annual Mo News sale, mo.news/premium.
Time for the speed read from Bloomberg. Harvard University says it will not answer to the federal government's latest demands, even after the Trump administration threatened to revoke $9 billion in funding and grants and contracts with the school. Harvard's president, Alan Garber, is the first university president to directly and publicly refuse to comply with Trump's administration and accuse it of violating its constitutional rights. Garber said that the Trump administration late Friday demanded that Harvard reduce the power of students and faculty members, report foreign students who commit conduct violations immediately to federal authorities, end all diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and bring an outside group to ensure intellectual diversity on campus, among other steps. Garber said those demands went beyond previous ones and that his school will not, quote, negotiate over its independence. He also accused the demands of violating the university's First Amendment rights and exceeding the government's authority under Title VI, which prohibits discrimination. The Trump administration has been threatening to pull funding for research, including medical studies, at elite universities that it is accused of failing to protect Jewish students during last year's pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses. Of the $9 billion in funding, some of that is designated for Boston area hospitals like Mass General Brigham and Boston Children's Hospital. Harvard received about $1.5 billion in funding from the National Institutes of Health in 2024.
Yeah, a reminder here that so much of the research related to public health, national security, a number of matters is done at institutions like Harvard, Columbia, Northwestern. Some of the colleges that the administration has been targeting here are saying they're not abiding by policy. They aren't doing enough for anti-Semitism. And so we are going to hit them where it hurts unless they change their policies. So we have been covering the Columbia story. Columbia, literally the last interim president had to leave over this, was willing to make a deal here with the Trump administration. Harvard saying, not so fast. We will not make a deal with you. You are threatening us, and we believe that these threats here are unconstitutional. So clearly Harvard here willing to fight. They are also pushing back, saying that they have done more when it comes to the fight against anti-Semitism. Garber, by the way, the president of Harvard, is Jewish. He says he's experienced the issue firsthand on campus, but he says that they have made changes on campus. They've addressed it. That includes, they say, placing its undergraduate Palestine Solidarity Committee on probation after a protest they held last month that broke campus rules, including impeding access to campus buildings. The school has also fired 2 faculty leaders as part of its Center of Middle Eastern Studies. They had been accused in the past of anti-Israel bias, of anti-Semitism. But some of the asks here from Harvard, as far as they're concerned, that the government tried to make here, went too far, conducting plagiarism checks on all current and prospective faculty members per government guidance, sharing its hiring data with the Trump administration, providing all admissions data to the federal government, including rejected and admitted applicants. There's just stuff here that they're like, no, we run our own college. We're not handing all this over in exchange for keeping our funding here. But this does have a real life impact here. Jill, as we're recording this on Monday night, we now have reporting from a couple media outlets that the White House now officially froze $2 billion of the $9 billion after Harvard rejected the demand. So this is a fast-moving situation. This is yet another story that we will see end up in the courts here. But they've requested all these changes for $9 billion in funding, and so far the administration has already frozen just over $2 billion.
From CNBC, President Trump said Monday he's looking to pause some tariffs to help car companies, leading to stocks for companies like Ford and General Motors to get a boost yesterday. Another win for the White House, Nvidia, the company that makes the chips powering a lot of today's AI boom, announced that they are pushing to produce their AI supercomputers entirely in the United States for the first time ever. Moving more production has been part of the White House goal with these tariffs. The company saying Monday that they're making a $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure in the U.S., working with partners to design and build chip factories, which they say will strengthen their supply chain and help meet the global chip demand. They say they've already commissioned more than 1 million square feet of space to build and test Nvidia Blackwell chips in Arizona, as well as AI supercomputers in Texas. Both are expected to ramp up in the next 12 to 15 months. The company also says the project is expected to create hundreds of thousands of jobs and drive trillions of dollars in economic security over the coming decades. Nvidia has done most of its manufacturing in Taiwan, which Trump has initially put a 32% tariff on before pausing all reciprocal tariffs.
Now, some of these moves, especially by chip makers, come out of what was called the CHIPS Act. That's something that was passed during the presidency of Biden. But some of this extra move here is also due to pressure by Trump. And so the White House has actually put out a list, and we posted it on Friday on the Instagram page of just all the companies that have made moves in recent months, again, in sort of the tail end of Biden, but also in the early months of Trump here, to move production, move facilities, move things to the U.S. Yesterday, you also had National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett say that more than 10 countries now have offered trade deals to the U.S. He called those offers, quote, very good and amazing. This is part of the effectively White House effort to get 90 trade deals in 90 days as part of that pause. So again, they're saying there are at least 10 potential trade deals here. Again, these trade deals typically very specific, take a lot of time to negotiate, but the White House is very bullish on this. It's only been just over a week and a half since Trump first announced those huge tariffs there on nearly 80 countries. It does come, though, as we continue to feel the impact of the existing tariffs, of the flux of the past couple of weeks here, Jill. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon saying in his latest interview that the possibility of a recession is now effectively a coin flip, 50% yes, 50% no.
Hassett, by the way, on Fox Business said that there is a 0% chance of a recession this year.
Yes, very strong jobs numbers. As far as he's concerned, there will be no recession, which is so interesting, Jill. And this speaks to the sort of the confusing takes we've been hearing from the White House, because that's typically the take of the White House. There will be no recession. There will be no recession. There will be no recession. But in recent months, you've had Trump and others who are like, well, we could have a recession.
There might be one.
Which is one of the things that's freaked out the markets. And that was before the tariffs. So now to have Hassett say that, it's one of the challenges I think the markets are having, business leaders are having, which is like, who am I believing on what day, at what time on all of this? Just a lot of uncertainty continues here.
From the Associated Press, a suspect's been arrested after an intruder was reported at the UnitedHealthcare headquarters in Minnesota. This is months after the company's CEO was murdered in New York City. The man was first spotted in the parking lot yesterday outside of the corporate campus. He showed up at a security checkpoint where he was not supposed to be. Police got him to surrender peacefully about an hour after he was first apprehended. They said there was not a threat to the public, and they did not mention if he had any weapons on him.
Yeah, nonetheless, still a scary situation for the UnitedHealthcare insurance company there, especially given the assassination of Thompson as he was headed into an investor conference in December back in Manhattan. Jill, we work a couple blocks away from there, so it's always sort of eerie looking up the street and looking at that Hilton and knowing what took place there. Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old who's accused of killing Thompson, said it was specifically trying to target the U.S. healthcare system. So it's led to a lot of leaders in the private sector, including in the insurance industry, to get private security. So the incident in Minnesota is certainly getting some attention.
From Axios, the Meta Antitrust trial kicked off this week. The Federal Trade Commission has accused the tech giant of breaking antitrust law by buying WhatsApp and Instagram in order to squash competition. Meta said the companies wouldn't have survived without its backing, and that Meta has plenty of competition in the social media space. Now, if the FTC wins, Meta could have to sell off WhatsApp and Instagram. The case could last more than 2 months. Mark Zuckerberg, who is the chief executive of Meta, took the witness stand Monday to defend his company in this landmark antitrust trial that could dismantle the company. Among others who are set to testify, former COO Sheryl Sandberg and many others from within the company and its rivals. Zuckerberg was at the White House earlier this month, reportedly trying to persuade the president and other officials to settle the FTC's suit. He's made moves since Trump took office to try to cozy up to him in hopes of alleviating some of this scrutiny. The New York Times did this whole analysis where they were just pointing out how this idea of Zuckerberg testifying, it's not his strength. He tends to get nervous. He tends to maybe say things that he does not necessarily mean, despite media training.
Yeah, so we'll watch what comes out of this. He's expected to keep testifying today. Now, in this case, the U.S. government contends that Meta illegally cemented a social media monopoly when they bought Instagram, bought WhatsApp. They bought both when they were just tiny startups, combining them into Meta. Of course, they bought Instagram for about $1 billion. Today, Instagram is worth more than $100 billion. WhatsApp Also, a significant purchase. It's really coalesced Meta's power here. And so what the government's arguing is that has deprived consumers of other social networking options and real competition and innovation. That's a typical argument against monopoly here. Now, on the other side here, Meta is arguing that they face plenty of competition from TikTok, Snapchat, other social media platforms. And the Federal Trade Commission approved the acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp more than a decade ago, and trying to unwind mergers like this would set a very dangerous precedent. So that's the argument here that Meta's making. One of the challenges here for the government, Jill, and it's going to be really difficult for them to prove here to meet this threshold, how are they going to argue, and we'll see how this proceeds, that Meta would not have achieved the same success without these acquisitions? It's like sort of the unknown. And so they need to argue, yeah, this is a monopoly because they acquired this. And Meta's going to say, well, Facebook was pretty big before this. And who's to say we wouldn't have built our own thing and become just as big or even bigger than this? And so that's one issue here the government faces as far as the arguments are concerned. Also significant, it is very rare, extremely rare, to unwind mergers that were approved by the government years later. So we're going to watch this case unfold. I think we'll dive into it further in the newsletter today, pending other news, and is going to be a super interesting trial to watch. Unfortunately, though, federal, so not on camera, Jill.
From the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin aerospace company launched a star-studded space flight Monday morning that lasted all of 11 minutes. The all-women NS-31 crew included CBS journalist Gayle King, pop star Katy Perry, Bezos' fiancée Lauren Sanchez. Joining the flight were Aisha Bowe, a former NASA aerospace engineer, Amanda Nguyen, astronaut trainee and anti-sexual violence activist. She became the first Vietnamese woman to travel to space. And Carrie Ann Flynn, who is an independent film producer. You could hear the women screaming during the flight, which took off from Van Horn, Texas. Here's a clip.
Hear that screaming inside the capsule?
And all three parachutes reefing.
But Moshe, they made it.
They
lived to tell.
Jill, also getting a lot of attention is how they reacted upon landing, walking down those steps. Gayle King kissing the ground, and then Katy Perry kissing the ground, leading to a whole bunch of memes, including the obvious one.
I kissed the ground and I liked it.
There you go. Also, speaking of singing, Katy Perry did sing while they made it into space for that brief moment that they're in space. The whole thing's 11 minutes. They go up and they come down. It's basically just like a 62-mile ride above, up to 62 miles and then down. Katy Perry not singing Firework or any of her songs, but singing What a Wonderful World. She's like, it's not about me, it's about the world. And so that's why she says she chose to sing that while in space there. Of course, you mentioned some of the others, a couple scientists they're in. They are getting a lot of criticism for the celebrity focus of this, among others, Lauren Sanchez, who was a local reporter. But one of the main reason she was on this flight, she's Jeff Bezos' fiancée. She was actually joking about that while she was being interviewed afterwards. Here's a bit of Sanchez talking about seeing Bezos before, and one thing that she told that reporter.
Seeing Jeff before I left, I just went, I had to come back. I mean, we're getting married. If I didn't come back, that would be a bummer for me.
Only you, by the way, would say this to me. You said, Jeff, if you don't want to marry me, you don't have to send me to space.
Don't have to send me to space.
Motion, there's also a video of Jeff Bezos face planting. He was so excited when this capsule returned to Earth. You see him running around and trying to look in all of the windows, and then he just wiped out.
Well, that's a privilege you have when you own and you create the company, is that you get to go up to the shuttle. And also, I imagine, there's a lot of probably fear and concern when you send the love of your life into space on a capsule that your company built. So I'm sure he was making sure she made it back in one piece.
Look, a lot of people took some digs at this as just a PR stunt. And look, women have traveled to space before. We just reported on Sunny Williams. She spent 9 months in space.
Women have been going to space since the 60s, Jill.
That said, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed seeing the celebs. And it was a PR stunt. And I think it's okay to admit that.
part of space travel is a PR stunt. They have to get people excited. That was the whole deal in the 50s and 60s with the Gemini missions and the Apollo missions and the space race. Yes, there was something to it, but they were also building buzz, building excitement. We are dreamers as human beings, right? We like to explore new places. Several hundred years ago, it was, the explorers from Europe making their way across the oceans to explore new places. Certainly you have explorers that go to the highest peaks. You have explorers that go to the deepest parts of the ocean. And of course, you have people who want to see beyond Earth. And it certainly provides a lot of perspective, a lot of profound thoughts from the astronauts who've been in space that when they look back at Earth, they're like, it reinforced to me just the importance of, maintaining this planet, being good to each other, because this is it for us as human beings, as much as the Elon Musks of the world want to dream about Mars. And so they have to build this buzz. And I think there is something significant here to the fact that this was 6 women going into space, an all-female flight. The NASA mission that's supposed to go back to the moon in the next coming years will land the first woman on the moon. At least that was the plan. They've explicitly taken out that statement now. NASA had that up until Trump came in office, and they've claimed that that's DEI. But hopefully, nonetheless, we still will be landing, while it's not explicit, a woman on the moon. It means a lot to people growing up to see people like them go to these sorts of things. So, sorry, I'm getting off my soapbox here, but just to play devil's advocate on myself.
No, I agree with you.
There you go, everybody. You're like, wow, Moshe, like really talking about space a lot there.
All right, you're on the next mission.
Okay.
What
All
do you,
right.
is that what we're looking for?
I don't know. They had 2 journalists on this mission, Jill. I think the first news influencer to go into space. That's what I'm going for. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. On this day in 1947, Jackie Robinson makes his official debut for the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time. Opening day at Ebbets Field. He was the first Black Major League Baseball player in the modern era. On this day in 1954, today becomes Tax Day, April 15th. In fact, Tax Day used to be March 15th. They moved it, and so it moved to April 15th, and this is where it's been for a few decades now. On this day in 1955, I mentioned it at the top, a big day in fast food history. Ray Kroc opens the first McDonald's franchise in Des Plaines, Illinois. On this day in 1959, a new ruler by the name of Fidel Castro visits the U.S. He had just recently taken over Cuba. President Eisenhower at the time didn't think much of him and his communist philosophy. So Eisenhower actually went to the golf course, was like, I'm not meeting with this Castro guy. And in fact, Castro had to meet with Vice President Richard Nixon at the time. Privately, Nixon had hoped that he would push Castro in a more democratic direction. It did not appear to have worked. Relations would soon deteriorate between the U.S. and Cuba. Eisenhower was actually the one who ordered the CIA to begin arming and training a group of Cuban exiles to conduct a coup on Castro that would become known as the Bay of Pigs. That's something that would actually happen during the first few months of Kennedy. That failed. Fast forward, Jill, a few years later, Kennedy resents that. The CIA is mad at him for not trying again, yada, yada, yada. And as the theorists go, that's why they killed Kennedy. That yada, yada, yada did a lot, right?
I mentioned the lobster bisque. It's a Seinfeld
For those of you, that was a
reference,
deep cut. That was a deep cut from Seinfeld, which takes us to pop culture history. On this day in history, In Living Color premieres on Fox on this day in 1990. A much more diverse version of Saturday Night Live, black humor, Wayans brothers. It also would give us Jim Carrey, who incidentally tried it for SNL, didn't make it, but makes it on In Living Color. It would last for 5 seasons.
It would also give us Jennifer Lopez, a fly girl.
J-Lo was a fly girl. So In Living Color really made its impact known. Another impactful thing happening on this day, No Doubt, releases their song, Don't Speak, on this day in history. And another song, 90s song, that got some attention, Mbop, released by Hanson on this day. We've told you this before, and Mark, our famous listener who knows all our On This Day in History, on these days in history, you know the answer to this, Mark. I'll give you a second. What does Mbop mean? We haven't told you since last year. Jill knows.
But it was something that I did learn on the podcast last year.
Yeah, and so just to remind everyone, I don't need to remind Mark. Mark, familiar with all this stuff. He wants new content on This Day in History. But for the rest of you, don't remember everything. I forgot. Mbop means go now, live in the moment. Life will be over and will have passed you by. So it represents time and the fact that time passes quickly. So go do the thing you need to do.
Unexpectedly deep and insightful, Moshe. I was expecting that it was going to be like another Swedish verse that didn't really mean anything, that was just trying to rhyme with another word. But no, this actually has some real meaning here.
Yeah, reference there to the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears, a bunch of Swedish producers wrote a bunch of their songs. In this case, no, the Hanson brothers. Hanson. Mba.
Moshe, anyone who's made it this far into the podcast,
they know
the whole Swedish. They know that
you guys are in for the deep cuts here on the podcast. About 40 minutes in.
No, they know the Backstreet Boys. They know all about the Swedes' impact on the music industry.
You learn about our obsessions and random facts at this point of the podcast, and I appreciate all of you who are still listening.
But that is it for us for this podcast anyway, and that's it for me for this week. I'm taking a couple of days off.
Jill, well deserved. Enjoy let's hope you get some vacation qualities, even though you're going on vacation with the whole family.
As I said, it's not really a vacation. I'm just not working. But I appreciate it. And it is fun. It's a good family time. Always fun.
Well, enjoy it. The news will keep happening, and we'll reset everything for you on Sunday going into Monday. But let's hope the news gods will be kind to me as I go solo, and we might bring in some guests this week. We'll see.
I have a couple of long car rides, so we'll be listening. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.